The reason for this is really macro. The markets have become risk off, and it's because of Tariff Liberation Day, which was April 2nd, has triggered a lot of concerns for investors because it was worse than expected. It was a 10% base rate for imports with an additional tariff rate for other countries that have large trade deficits with the US. President Trump referred to this as the operation is over and the patient has lived, but the stock market reaction has been very negative. The S&P on Thursday opened with a 3% gap down, and throughout the day, stocks were reeling. One of the reasons stocks were reeling is that investors were hopeful that these tariff levels would actually be dialed back, but Commerce Secretary Lutnick made multiple media appearances and insisted that President Trump is not going to back off, and that added to selling pressure. Even Peter Navarro did an interview on CBC reiterating that these are not negotiable, and it sent stocks reeling. So overall, the S&P fell 5% on the day after Tariff Liberation Day. That's not what I would have expected, and I don't think a lot of people expected. It was a negative surprise. But I want to give you a rundown on our take. First of all, the tariff rates that were shown are absurd. You've heard from many people talk about this. They are very hard to believe because the tariffs levied on China, for instance, is 34% on top of a penalty of 20%. Europe now has a 20% import for all products. Japan, 24%. Korea, 25%. I mean, Japan and Korea are allies. Additionally, I'm sure you've heard, but these exhibited tariff charged to USA rates are not actually tariff calculations, but it looks like it's some measure of the measure of the total deficit to the amount exported. Now, there are plenty of signs that Trump wants a deal. Now, I know I just showed you his lieutenant saying he doesn't want a deal. But keep in mind a couple of things. The implementation date for the higher rate is April 9th. That is a delay, and I think that's intentional. And in fact, Trump himself, and I'll share later, despite what Lutnick says, actually has commented that he believes that he can strike a deal. He gave an interview on Air Force One Thursday evening after the market closed, and he says tariffs give us great power to negotiate. Specifically, says every country's calling us. That's the beauty of what we do. We put ourselves in the driver's seat. If we'd asked for the countries to do us a favor, they would have said no. Now they're doing anything for us. The tariffs give us great power to negotiate.
In a whirlwind of market uncertainty and escalating tensions, Bitcoin took a dramatic nosedive below the pivotal $80,000 mark on Sunday, echoing a grim sentiment across U.S. stock index futures. As fears of a protracted trade war loom large on the international stage following retaliatory tariffs from China, the cryptocurrency tumbled 5% to approximately $79,000. Market watchers are on edge, anticipating heightened volatility spurred by global economic turbulence. Welcome back to Investocracy Crypto.
Even aside from these macro sort of outlooks, how about the AI trade? I mean, we've certainly seen signs of weakening, some skepticism there, especially surrounding NVIDIA, which hasn't filled in that pre-DeepSeek gap that it created. Where does that stand? How important is that for this next move forward, for the bottoming process?
I mean, I think technology is still important for the next few years. You know, in our sector weightings this year, it's number 3. So financials, industrials, first and second. But I think it's just digesting a lot of the prodigious gains the last 2 years. But I don't think AI spending is really going to weaken. I know investors have a lot of good news baked in.
So I think the market, if it does resume a move higher, you think it's the same leadership, or there has been some rotation away from some of the Mag 7 and financials have looked strong. I mean, will it look different, or will the winners come back with a vengeance?
Yeah, I mean, in January, the first, let's say, five weeks or so, that leadership was different because it was a lot more tech outside of the Mag 7, and it was financials, and it was some mid and small caps. I think once we're through this rough patch, that's the kind of leadership we think will.
All right, you want to make some. I don't know why we told people you were going to talk about Bitcoin, but now that we did, you do need to talk about it. I mean, it's come back a little bit. What did you attribute the move down below 80 to? Just that it's Bitcoin? What do you want?
Yes. I would say what's interesting is Bitcoin's not had negative headlines in February, but it was down. But I know our technician, Mark Newton, had talked about this being a cyclical downturn in Bitcoin through the end of March. So he was talking mid-January, getting down to 62. The weekend...
105 to 62. That's just Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's a typical...
Do the math, though. It's like, yeah, in a month, 105 to 62.
Yeah, that's a test of the resolve
that
of
hurts
bulls, right?
people that buy at 105.
Yeah, but as you know, Bitcoin makes all of its gains in 10 days. So
Yeah.
if people sort of try to time this, they're going to miss out on a chance for Bitcoin to go back to its highs.
And by the end, at some point in this year, you think it gets, because last year you thought it might get to 150 or even higher, right?
Yeah, I think it's going to do better than 150 this year. You know,
You do?
Yeah.
U.S. dollar?
Yes.
What? 150?
Hungarian forint?
Yeah,
I mean, like,
I
what
don't
do you
know.
want?
Something that's a lot less than $150,000. That's amazing. So a lot better than higher than 150.
That's right, because it's becoming more widely held.
Yeah.
You know, if Citadel starts trading it, it starts to have more broad acceptance.
Okay. Tom Lee, thanks.
Thank you.
Don't be a stranger. You're not, but come back again. Thank you.
Amidst the chaos, let's inject a splash of humor into the sobering landscape of stock discussions. Have you ever noticed that trading Bitcoin can feel like riding a roller coaster blindfolded? Hang on tight. But let's not lose sight of the hard data driving these market tremors. With Bitcoin facing significant selling pressure from staggering liquidations, totaling a staggering $250 million in long liquidations over the past 24 hours, caution is the word of the day. The once high-flying cryptocurrency, having soared over 100% last year on the wings of regulatory optimism, now finds itself down 15% for the year.
As the U.S. and different governments start to buy Bitcoin, there's this moment of, are we accepting that Bitcoin is going to be a new global reserve currency, and does that push the U.S. dollar away from being the global reserve currency, and is that a risk for the U.S. in the long term? How do you think about that? And then I also want to touch on like Bitcoin versus gold and that correlation, which does not seem to be correlating right now as gold continues to go up. Although actually I shouldn't say that. Matt, you pointed out that that it is up since the election.
Yeah, I can take one more stab at this. This is a topic I care about deeply, and then I promise Ryan I'll shut up.
Keep going. I'm over here buying Bitcoin while you're talking, so we're good.
No, you're buying GameStop. Don't lie.
That's right. That's right.
We'll get to that in a second.
We'll get to that. Here's the thing that I really care about this. So Cliff Asness, who runs AQR, an incredible investor, incredible hedge fund investor, wrote a letter after the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve was announced and said that this is akin to the U.S. establishing a Chinese yuan reserve, right? Promoting something to replace the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And that's actually precisely wrong. I'm a strong proponent of the US dollar being the world's reserve currency. I know we'll talk about how stable coins can extend the period of time that the US dollar can serve as the world's reserve currency. It's good for America, which is a country that I live in. But we have to accept that there is a possible world in the future where we cede sole ownership of being the world's reserve currency. It's happened to every world reserve currency in the past. We have highly, accelerating debt and deficits. It could happen to the US in the future. And if it does, what do we want to happen? Do we want it to go to a non-political currency like Bitcoin, or do we want to go to a currency of one of our enemies, right? Or another foreign government? And all the strategic Bitcoin reserve does is it tilts that alternate stream that says, if the world wants to move off the dollar as the sole reserve asset, maybe the future will be dollar and then apolitical Bitcoin. And that's a lot better future for the US than going from dollar to Chinese yuan, which is the other option. So we can't ignore the possibility that this might happen in the future. And I think it's very forward thinking to sort of aim the flow of where we end up to something that's at least neutral, which is what Bitcoin is.
Looking at the charts, Bitcoin is navigating treacherous waters. After breaching the 200-day moving average and witnessing a grim death cross where the 50-day MA crossed below the 200-day MA, the outlook appears bleak. The cryptocurrency's price trajectory points southward, with potential key support levels emerging at $74,000, $65,000, and $57,000. Crucial zones where bulls may attempt to stem the bleeding. As we navigate this storm, keep your eyes on the $87,000 horizon. This battleground of resistance, marked by the convergence of the 50 and 200-day MAs, could dictate Bitcoin's recovery narrative as it struggles to regain lost ground. But before going any further, if you made it this far into the video, thank you. These videos take a lot of effort and time to make, so if you enjoyed them, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. This goes a long way in helping us grow. That said, back to the video.
I think we're just at the beginning of seeing non-crypto industry corporations purchasing Bitcoin as a treasury asset. So GameStop just announced that they raised $1.5 billion to purchase Bitcoin. And I think what people don't understand is that's going to make them the fourth largest, as you have on the screen here, the fourth largest holder of Bitcoin among public companies. So they're automatically jumping past a ton of Bitcoin miners, a ton of other companies like Metaplanet and others who have adopted this Bitcoin standard in recent months with one purchase. Now, GameStop, of course, is a bit of a unique equity, a bit of a unique investment because it's lived in this realm of Wall Street bets and meme stocks now for a couple of years. But I think this is a broader signal of investors, or rather executives at companies, recognizing that investors will reward companies who invest in Bitcoin. We've seen it happen with MicroStrategy, which went from a relatively small technology stock to now be included in the NASDAQ 100 following its immense Bitcoin buy. So I think this is more of a signal of what's to come. And there's a really nuanced kind of accounting rule that changed the beginning of 2025, where it made it a lot less risky. Talking about the de-risking of Bitcoin, this is one of those elements that de-risks Bitcoin as an investment for corporations. And that rule essentially said that before 2025, companies that invested in Bitcoin could only recognize a change in value when they wrote down the value of Bitcoin if the price fell. They weren't able to get a benefit in their earnings if the price of Bitcoin rose. So it was a huge risk move from an earnings perspective, or from signaling to the market what's happening with the company's growth and earnings if they purchased Bitcoin. But now, at the beginning of this year, that rule changed, and now companies can get the benefit of Bitcoin appreciation on their balance sheet reflected in their earnings. And I think that's a huge thing that's going to transform the market. We had 70 plus companies buying Bitcoin before that rule change went into effect. They were buying Bitcoin when, in the best case scenario, the investment would stay flat, and in a worst case scenario, the investment would fall and they would have to take a huge hit to their earnings. That's no longer the case. And I think we're starting to see more non-crypto companies recognize the benefit they can get from investing in Bitcoin as a treasury asset. I think the US investing in Bitcoin as a strategic reserve asset certainly de-risks a corporation doing that and looking dumb or coming off to investors like they don't know what they're doing. Say, look, the US government is doing this. Some of the best investors out there, Howard Lutnick, Scott Bessent, you have David Sachs, they're looking to bring Bitcoin into the US government. Why shouldn't we be doing that as a corporation when we can get a benefit to our stock price? So I think a lot more companies are going to buy Bitcoin this year, and GameStop's more the beginning of the trend that, again, the people that are catching the falling knife here.
As the dust settles on Bitcoin's turbulent ride, one thing remains clear. Amidst the market mayhem, opportunities beckon the discerning investor. Let the data guide your decisions, but remember, fortunes are made when fear is at its peak. Consider the potential for growth in Bitcoin as it faces challenges head-on, poised to bounce back from adversity. What's your take on this roller coaster ride in the stock market? Share your thoughts as we ride the waves of uncertainty together. But what do you think? Share your thoughts down below. And finally, if you would like to know more about cryptocurrencies, or specifically Bitcoin, go ahead and click on the next video on your screen. See you there.